and we'll have more updates throughout the morning as well. We are joined now by Christine Fair, who is a senior political scientist with the RAND Corporation. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me this morning.
This segment, we're going to focus on India and Pakistan. Obviously, a lot in the news with the attacks in Mumbai. The international section of the New York Times this morning headline says, India says Pakistanis carried out attacks that urges its neighbors to take strong actions. What's giving India the sense that the Pakistanis are responsible for this?
The identity of the lone attacker who actually survived the assault. It looks as if the fellow came from the Punjab in Pakistan. According to him, all of the attackers, all 10 of them, were from Pakistan. They trained in Pakistan. They were given very clear directions about when they were to travel to Karachi, where they traveled to Mumbai by boat. They went on a merchant marine vessel. They actually hijacked an Indian fishing trawler, where they beheaded the head of that ship, and then they made their way to Bombay, and then they wreaked their havoc. Apparently, they in Pakistan were told to memorize Google Maps of the city. It's really quite extraordinary. I'm actually quite incredulous myself that 10 people from Pakistan, particularly with some of the educational backgrounds that we're told that these fellows have, were able to do this simply by memorizing Google Maps. The Indians say so far they found no evidence of any sort of local support. Like I said, I'm really incredulous that 10 individuals who've never been in Bombay were able to execute the attack that they did.
This group that you said comes from Punjab, the Punjab area?
Well, actually, their headquarters of Lashkar-e-Taiba is in Muridke. That's their headquarters. It's located outside of the large Punjabi city, Lahore. So it is very much a Punjabi group based in Pakistan.
Do we know much about them beforehand?
Oh, yeah, this group's been around for quite some time. You know, it's interesting. When this attack first happened, I was incredibly dubious that it was Lashkar-e-Taiba. Lashkar-e-Taiba has never targeted Americans, and certainly not American citizens. Now, to be clear, Lashkar-e-Taiba has been operating in Afghanistan for at least the last year, where they've taken on U.S. and NATO forces. So it's not fair to say they haven't targeted Americans, but certainly not American citizens. And I've been collecting Lashkar-e-Taiba publications, posters, and propaganda for quite some time. They've been heavily anti-Semitic, but never in all of their time, in all of their decade or more of operating in the subcontinent, they've never targeted a Jewish institution, much less Jewish individuals. So this particular kind of attack, I was quite skeptical at first, was in fact Lashkar-e-Taiba.
There was a news report that early this morning, I don't have it here, that seemed to indicate there was torture of some of the victims at the Jewish Center. What do you know of that?
Well, I was talking to an Indian colleague of mine who covers this quite extensively. He had actually heard that there was even rape, that some of the victims had been raped. Again, all of this was really quite surprising. This is a level of savagery that Lashkar-e-Taiba is most definitely one of the most savage and capable militant groups operating in South Asia. But this attack really pushes the envelope even for Lashkar-e-Taiba. What makes the other reason why I was skeptical at first was that many of the militant groups operating in Pakistan, and there are dozens of them, I mean, there's no paucity of militant groups operating in and from Pakistan. But Lashkar-e-Taiba hasn't had any sort of leadership fractures. They haven't targeted the Pakistani state. And many of us who follow terrorism in South Asia believe that they're the closest to the ISI. So
and the ISI is what?
Pakistan's external intelligence agency. That most of the militant groups operating in South Asia, they didn't just grow up sui generis. In fact, the ISI cultivated them to project Pakistani's interests in India, Kashmir, and in Afghanistan. So when it became evident that this was a Lashkar-e-Taiba attack, very real questions arise about what was the coordination with the ISI in the execution of this attack. And that's why U.S.-Pakistan relations immediately come into focus in the background of this attack.
The ABC's Brian Ross reported yesterday that the U.S. warned India in October of a potential terror attack. His report said since Friday, U.S. intelligence agencies have been tracking the phones and SIM cards recovered by the Indian authorities from Mumbai, the terrorists there, leading to a treasure trove of leads in Pakistan and several possible connections to the United States. This group,
Lashkar-e-Taiba,
do they have connections in the U.S.?
Well, there have been some really interesting reports of people who claim to be Lashkar. So actually here in Virginia, we had a Lashkar paintball cell. Those individuals were apparently training paintball to, in preparation for some terrorist operation. They were a very interesting mix of folks. a number of Asian Americans, not necessarily Pakistani Americans. I think as time went on, people became fairly convinced that they weren't truly Lashkar-e-Taiba cells. There were a couple of notable Australians who were associated with Lashkar, and the Australians have been worried about Lashkar for quite some time. The problem is that if you're interested in becoming a terrorist and you live outside of Pakistan and you want to obtain training to become a terrorist, there are very few countries where you can go and get this kind of training. Pakistan remains one of those countries, and Lashkar-e-Taiba remains one of those groups offering this kind of training.
Christine Fair is our guest till 9 o'clock this morning, talking about India-Pakistan relations. Your phone calls welcome, 202-737-0001 for Democrats, 202-737-0002 for Democrats, rather, and for independents and all others, 202-628-0205. First to Long Branch in New Jersey on our Democrats line. Hi.
Good morning. How are both of you this morning?
Fine, thanks.
I get emails from Kevin Barrett. He ran for Congress out in Wisconsin, I believe, and he's a 9/11 truth teller as well. And apparently the Israeli Mossad had a lot to do with this attack in India. I don't know why everybody keeps pointing at Pakistan for everything. But, you know, I think some of us are a little tired of being lied to, A, by the politicians, and B, by your media. But what do you know about this Mossad thing? I have it right here by Amaresh Misra, Mumbai, the Mossad angle.
We'll get an answer, Long Branch. Thank you.
Well, I mean, this is the first time I've heard this. I'm going to be honest with you. I doubt necessarily the credibility of this. There are a number of individuals that I've spoken to who are very well placed and knowledgeable about Lashkar-e-Taiba, and the evidence does seem to be pointing very much in their direction. You know, I was very skeptical at first, as I said, that Lashkar did this, because the way in which it was reported, initially it didn't look like stuff that Lashkar would do. Lashkar, for example, had never done hostage taking. It turns out this wasn't a hostage standoff at all. Most of the people were killed when the gunmen entered the building, and in fact the gunmen were holed up, and it wasn't a hostage situation at all. But this does resemble many other attacks that Lashkar has perpetrated in Indian-administered Kashmir and in other parts of India. And the evidence pointing back to Pakistan does look pretty compelling. Now, one could certainly discount the testimony of this 19-year-old lone survivor and the conditions under which he gave that testimony, but there's a lot of other corroborating information coming from Indian as well as American sources that really does put the finger at Lashkar-e-Taiba. And this is not something that's beyond their capability. Lashkar is one of the most capable militant groups in South Asia.
On the diplomatic front, the Financial Times reports this morning about the trip of Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Rice urges Islamabad to root out extremists. She has got this visit to India and to Pakistan, preparing for a hastily arranged visit to India tomorrow. Ms. Rice said that the U.S. urged India to give a controlled response to the atrocity. She said New Delhi must concentrate on getting the highest levels of cooperation from law enforcement and intelligence agencies in Pakistan, rather than relying on a military response there. Are they getting that? Is India getting that response? Initially, there was a report that Pakistan's highest intelligence officer was going to come and then didn't come.
Well, I mean, a couple of things are really laid bare by the last couple of days of Indo-Pakistan exchange. First, India really wants to be seen as a responsible nuclear power. It recently secured and went through the final approvals for the IAEA, the NSG, and the Zanger Group, basically the Indo-U.S. civilian nuclear deal. So India really wants to see itself, and it wants to be seen as others, as a responsible nuclear power of global, who operates on a global stage. It doesn't want to be a regional muckraker. So India, at the apex levels of leadership, wants to handle this in a responsible way. The fact is that the evidence links the attackers to Lashkar-e-Taiba. There is not evidence at this juncture that links Lashkar-e-Taiba to the ISI and to the actual Pakistan government. So a military response with this level of evidence is hardly justifiable, and it's probably not in India's interest. It's also not in our interest to have India mobilize a military response, because as soon as India mobilizes along the Pakistan border, the Pakistani armed forces are going to move their forces, which are currently arrayed along the Afghan border, towards the India border. And this is what happened in 2001 when Pakistan-based militants attacked the Indian parliament. India readied for war. Pakistan moved its troops from the west to the east, and that's when al-Qaeda and the Taliban were able to easily infiltrate into Pakistan's tribal areas. So the U.S. is very keen that this not take on a military dimension because it would give the Pakistanis an excuse to mobilize.